Welcome back to Following Noah on a Stormlight podcast. This week is episode 57, and we're doing chapters 3 through 7 of Oathbringer, book 3 of the Stormlight Archive by Brandon Sanderson. We started Oathbringer last week, and you guys said you were excited for Dalinar flashback chapters. We have one this week. We get Kaladin back this week. We get Syl back this week, which we've actually been missing Syl for quite a while. Like, she had a little bit of dialogue towards the end of Words of Radiance, but ever since about part 3 of Words of Radiance, we haven't really heard from Syl. So I certainly appreciated having her back, and we've got some more Dalinar content to talk about, present day and flashback. Paul, how are you feeling?
Man, I'm feeling great. Elliot kind of said it in our previous episode about it's nice to be back in Roshar in our main series, and it really is. This is our first week of like really full chapters of it, and it's really nice. I'm excited.
Elliot?
I gotta be honest. I'm a little exhausted. I've had a rough week, but I've actually been really enjoying having Oathbringer to kind of escape to kind of immerse myself into this world and deal with my life problems later. So I've been loving the book, loving to get back into it, like you said, Paul.
Oh, of course.
Awesome. Do you guys have 2 words to summarize episode 57, these chapters? We'll go Elliot first.
I'm going to stick with my theme of opposites from last time. My 2 opposites this time are old and new.
Old and new. I think I know where that's headed. Paul?
All right. Well, I almost have some opposites, kind of, if you want to think of it that way. Okay, one of them will just say it. I'll say it in one word so that it is one word. It's new beginnings. And my other word,
isn't that my move? Squishing words
yes,
into 2.
Yes, it is. New beginnings is one of my words, and my other word is oxymoron or oxymorons. So yeah,
I'm glad that we have 5 words as opposed to 3 from last week, and we can use these words to talk about this episode. All right, I need to start putting stricter rules on these word choices. I think, Paul, you gave me 3, but you claimed it's 2. You know, back when Elliot gave 3 words that one time, I tried to argue for him that I can't argue. New beginnings is one word.
New
Paul.
beginnings.
It's not
new
one
beginnings
word.
Is a word. I wrote it down as one word. So I mean,
it's not new beginnings. It's new beginnings.
Yeah, new beginnings.
I had a short tangent here. I had a physics teacher in high school. His name was, shout out to Mr. Wilson. He always had the theory that if you understand what the word means, then it's a word. So I understand what new beginnings, what the definition of that word would be. So I guess it's a word.
Done.
Of course.
All right. How does it pertain to Oathbringer?
Okay, so I'm actually going to talk about oxymoron first, because this one took me a little longer to think of. My initial word is going to be lighthearted, and then, so I would say, thinking of lighthearted and new beginnings, we see a lot of stuff happen in this chapter that's kind of like turning over a new leaf, or we're seeing things in a different light, but kind of in a positive way. But I put oxymoron because we see a lot of dark stuff. We see Kaladin getting in fights, and we see the Blackthorn Dalinar, and there's a lot of ruthless scenes. So I really couldn't justify putting lighthearted because there's a lot of dangerous stuff going on. So I chose oxymoron for that reason, because I feel like we have a lot of positive things to look at, but it's kind of entangled in a mess. So there's that. And then New Beginnings kind of plays into that. I feel like, yeah, kind of the concept of turning over a new leaf. Kaladin and Syl are back. It's kind of just a little more of our nice little service level fun moment. So
All right, Elliot.
So I'm probably being boring again, like I was last episode, with some fairly predictable words here, but I just had to go with it because it resonated with what I kind of got out of these chapters. I I picked old and new just because we see a number of comparisons between some old and some new versions of things, if you will. There's, of course, Dalinar. We see the old version of Dalinar, who, wow, what a different version of Dalinar that is. We'll get into it. And then this this one's a little cheeky perhaps, but we've got discussion about Dalinar's old wife, and then of course we now have Dalinar's new wife. There's that. And then of course Kaladin with we're familiar with the old Kaladin and new Kaladin. We've been on that journey with him from old to new, but I really was struck by this encounter with his parents. Spoiler, that's a big moment. We'll get to it in a little bit. Of Kaladin's parents having to reconcile this new who Kaladin is, who I love that kind of processing of he's not only a new person, he's like 3 times over a new person since they've seen him last. He's not only been completely changed once, he's been completely changed 3 times. And so he's so different from the Kaladin that left Hearthstone when he did. And just, yeah, that was powerful to think about. So that was old and new. Old and new.
Cool. I am excited to talk about Kaladin and his interaction with his parents, and we'll get there. But we do have an interesting dynamic here with young Dalinar with a flashback chapter. I believe it's 34 years ago is the tag for Dalinar's flashback. So this is what, young 20s Dalinar, maybe 20 exactly.
I was trying to guess what age he was, because he also refers to, like, he sees some like 17 or 18-year-old and is like, oh, just barely younger than me.
Yep.
So 20 I think is what I was kind of guessing.
Yep. And we have it in our notes here. This is not the Dalinar that has read The Way of Kings that we've gotten to know. There are some very interesting details in this chapter, and I'll hand it over to either one of you, whoever wants to pick it up. But there's some interesting details in this chapter that I'll highlight if you guys don't.
I can start us. This, I should have seen this coming. This should not have been a surprise. The fact that we knew Dalinar was a very different person when he was younger. We've had characters tell him, where's the Blackthorn Dalinar that just charges out and wins the day? Like, why aren't you that person anymore? We just hadn't actually seen that version of him firsthand. But now that we do, it was a little shocking for me. I should have been ready for it, but I wasn't. And to see Dalinar act so ruthlessly and so even just straight up dishonorable in some of the stuff that he does was like, wow, this is not the Dalinar whose journey I've been inspired by, or whose actions I would like to emulate. And so this was it. There's a big difference.
Paul, any thoughts? You've expressed some disinterest in Dalinar as a character. Does this make you more interested, give you another layer, or is this just more of the same and you're not that interested?
It definitely is good. Like, it definitely made me more interested. Just kind of seeing, I don't know, it's very unpredictable, almost like what is happening at behavior. I'm mostly referring to when he recruits this bowman at the end of the chapter. I thought it was really bizarre, but like it wasn't bizarre in a way that it didn't make sense, but just it gave a light to how young Dalinar functioned. He was the guy tried to kill him or kill someone. I think it was they tried to kill Dalinar, right?
Mhm.
And then was unsuccessful, and they caught him. And he was like, "Okay, great! Like you're a good shot. Like welcome to the team." And it was very interesting. Um, you're right. I had mentioned a little bit of worry about Dalinar as an exciting character throughout this book. And I think the concern of that is more of his just do what's right nature, and like the visions are really cool, but a lot of like his interactions with people current day are not that exciting.
Okay.
So I think that's more of where my concern comes from. Seeing this stuff was super cool and I loved it. So
Cool. Let me give you some history, a little history lesson here. Chapter 3. This is Gavilar going on his campaigns, or at least sending Dalinar on his campaigns for him. He is trying his best to unite the High Princes. Gavilar wants to be king, and some of the other Lethi aren't accepting it. Some of the other High Princes. So this battle that we are thrown into here is Alethi versus Alethi, and Dalinar is running down and killing, along with Sadeas, which interesting dynamic there. The Sadeas, Dalinar, how good of terms they are on at this point, and then the degrade that we see, or that we have seen, that happens later for them. But yeah, there's an interesting dynamic for those two, and then yeah, just there's no war code that he's holding the Alethi to in this chapter, or to himself to, because the entire Way of Kings, he's getting the impression that he needs to hold up to the Alethi war codes and hold everybody else accountable to the Alethi war codes. And now we are beginning to get some more context as to why people aren't giving him the credit that he thinks he deserves, because they've seen this Dalinar, young Dalinar, who used to slaughter them on the field and pillage their towns, and the only reason why he doesn't is because he uses it as a bargaining tool for that assassin sniper guy with the bow. It's like, if you join my team, I won't pillage your town, implying that they would have otherwise. So if you think of this chapter within the context of him talking to the other High Princes, then why nobody took him seriously is because this is who Dalinar used to be when he was young. Is, I'm a warlord, I'm the Blackthorn. This is the Blackthorn gaining his reputation, and who everyone figures Dalinar to be. So,
And I noticed that this version of Dalinar doesn't even need shard plate or a shard blade. He's that much of just a dominant force on the battlefield that he doesn't even need it. It's like, man, this guy's just a juggernaut.
yeah, he doesn't have plate or blade at this point.
But yeah, some of the things that he and his soldiers do, shooting the enemy in the back while they're trying to retreat, and shooting the opponent's horse intentionally to bring him down. And there was a couple, oh yeah, rounding up hostages. We'll see how they fight while we hold our swords to their family. That kind of stuff. That's just like, yeah, that's you, you're you're right, Trevor, and you're putting some interesting things into perspective of the people that Dalinar's trying to unite are gonna know him as
Right.
this person who wrecked their towns and slaughtered their people. Like that's how he gained his fame or notoriety or whatever you want to call that.
Any other thoughts on this flashback chapter? That's pretty much what you're supposed to, I think what you're supposed to get from this chapter is just, this is a very different Dalinar than what we're used to.
Yep.
Alrighty. Chapter 4, present day. We have a marriage. We have a marriage scene towards the second half of this chapter, and Paul, I know I can't talk about Dalinar and Navani without throwing questions at you. How do you feel? First of all, for a marriage, does this help at all? Does this bother you still? What are your thoughts?
Paul's the ardent, like standing over in the corner, just like.
So I remember whenever I read this chapter, I was like, I really hope I'm not even asked anything. Like, honestly, I was like, I just want to sit back and just let this one slide by. It was okay. Like, if you're asking my personal opinion, I didn't like it at all. I didn't enjoy it. Like, I was like, okay, come on, let's get past this. I don't care. I don't want to listen to this. Like, and stuff. It was just kind of the like, oh Navani, oh Dalinar, like, and I didn't enjoy it at all. Um, sure, cool. I can't. I don't think I have a real. I can't tell because I'm pretty biased to just in general not liking the chapter. That don't know if I have legs to stand on and be like, this chapter's bad, because I don't know if I can say that. If other people think that, though, I would agree with you. But long story short, I don't have any like argument points other than I just didn't enjoy it. I didn't like it. All the like just description. There's nothing wrong with it. I just don't like it is all. I was like, okay, next chapter, let's go. So yeah.
So I'll just go out on a limb and say you didn't read this one twice while you were doing it.
That's a safe bet. I did not read this one twice. You're right. Yeah, yeah, you're right on the money there, Trevor. I did not read this chapter twice.
Paul, this is why you and I balance each other out really well, because you key in on so many things that I don't, and then there's chapters like this where I took almost an entire page of notes on this chapter alone. There's so much in here that I was like, oh, that's interesting, and ooh, but this, and oh, like this was probably the most interesting chapter for me of these 5 that we read for this week, probably by quite a bit.
I will give my like little redeeming qualities. So like as far as content or things we may learn, cool, great, awesome. As far as the way it was presented, I was like, okay, come on, like let's do something else. But like I think one thing I am super curious about is Dalinar's old wife and why you can't hear that and all that stuff. Which I'm gonna just guess that that's some of the things he wrote down, just because it felt like it came up a couple times throughout this chapter.
Yeah.
And stuff. But I'm curious to hear your thoughts on it. I may not have as much to add, but I'm very curious to learn.
I'll talk about just one awkward or uncomfortable thing, and then move on to some actually big predictions that I've got out of this chapter. But the one thing that I did got me thinking a little bit was in the one scene where Navani's trying to full on seduce Dalinar. He stops himself, and Navani's kind of frustrated and is like, why, Dalinar, why are you pushing back? And Dalinar's response is very interesting actually to me. He talks about control and how it's so important for him that he maintain control of himself, that he maintain that self-discipline regardless of what it is, whether it's on the battlefield, whether it's in his politics, whether it's in his love life. He has to maintain that control, and he kind of hints at he can't let go of that control or he's going to become something he fears. And coming right out of the flashback chapter that we had, it seems perhaps very plausible that what he fears is the old version of himself. Perhaps there's going to be a point where Dalinar is able to gain control over his more violent ways, I guess if you will. But perhaps the way he achieved that is by keeping this iron grip on his actions and just keeping such a tight control of himself that he doesn't let himself do, anything like that. And so that level of like self-discipline is interesting.
I have to chime in. I see exactly what you're saying. I can agree with that. Um, I just think it's extremely cheesy for this like love scene for him to be like, Hold on, Navani. I can't do this, or I'm worried because control like I'm just afraid of becoming who I once was. Like stopping in this scene and like doing that, I just can't get over that. I think that's incredibly cheesy and stuff. Like whatever it's in relation to like combat and all this stuff, I think it's great and fitting and an
Yeah.
excellent point. I just think it's really funny here, and
Yeah.
I just can't quite take it seriously. And being like, hold on, like I haven't been there since my wife died. Like, it's just really.
Yep.
So yeah. Oh man, but yes, you make a great point though. So yeah.
No, I totally get it. I totally get that. I said it. It was a little bit of an awkward one, but an interesting one to get inside Dalinar's head a little bit. However cheesy it is inside Dalinar's head. Yeah, Trevor, anything to add there before I talk more about this chapter?
The only thing I'd add is that it's just in Dalinar's mind, if he, what's the word I'm looking for? Settles on one of his morals, then what's stopping him from, caving to everything that he wants to do is carnal passions or whatever you want to call that. So
yeah, exactly. It feels like there's like it's like he's holding up a huge dam with this huge torrent of water behind it. He feels like if one brick is removed, the whole thing is going to come crashing down.
Right. And so
yeah,
while it probably is cheesy for you, Paul, I completely understand that. Dalinar's like, I found an equilibrium and I know how to hold this right here, so I'm not gonna hold anything anywhere else because I know this works for me and I'm gonna stay right here. So
For sure, and that makes total logical sense. Like, for the most part, when I say hey, I don't like it, it's like not that deep. It's not like I hear this and I'm like, oh my gosh, I need to skip it or something. But like, no, I think it's kind of funny. Especially, I'm also listening to the audiobook and just kind of hearing like Michael Kramer like whisper things in my ears. Like, it makes it more interesting. I'm like, okay, like let's move on. So,
all right. Quick thought. What are your thoughts on safe hands? Like as a trope, if you will. Like not Dalinar. Brandon Sanderson's been asked about this of why safe hands. Like why would you want to do that? He's like, oh, I just think it's weird, like and awkward, and it's funny to me. Like people like some cultures pick the weirdest things to be paranoid and cover up. And so he's like, yeah, Alethi just cover up their safe hands because they think that's modest. What do you like? And then in this scene, Navani is like, oh, stroking his cheek with her safe hand. Like it's supposed to be like, super intimate or whatever. But
like my thoughts in general, I mean, I could definitely see what Brandon Sanderson was going for there, and I get that. It's kind of like this world kind of resembles Earth. Like their thing, like at least the landscape and how people talk to each other is relatively like what we're used to, humans and Earth and stuff. But there's just like random things he throws in there, and it's just kind of funny. And you could tell Safe Hand is that. But yeah, I've never thought about it that much. But just it's the point of like, oh, it's something modest, but or like maybe culturally appropriate, but it's kind of weird. Like it's kind of funny when you think about it. Like it's not a big deal.
well,
How we would think about it.
I agree, and it's on a like day-to-day basis with like Shalon and the other women we see, it is kind of funny when there's just like an offhand reference to it, and she pulled a glove onto her safe hand, like, oh, haha, Alethi women cover their safe hand. But then in a scene like this, where Trevor, you're right, where it's like, and her safe hand was uncovered. And it's like, okay, now it's just getting weird. It's nope, it's just weird now.
So we're going way too long on this, but I still want to talk about it. Whenever I've thought about doing a visual adaptation of the Stormlight Archive, I always think back to safe hands and how inconvenient that would be to put on screen. Like, that's just gonna be so weird to constantly put on screen is for a safe hand sleeve. And I think back to the Lord of the Rings special features where Billy Boyd, I think it is, he's complaining about hobbits having hairy feet and how they had to put prosthetics on for literally every day for over a year. Like, why did Tolkien have to make them have hairy feet? Like, it's a similar thing. Like, why do I, like, whoever's gonna be the actress for Shalon, like, why do I have to cover my, I don't know, left hand, right? I don't remember. My hand for literally every scene ever. Like, it's funny to me.
I was thinking that whoever the actresses are gonna, like, they're just only gonna get to use one hand the whole time, and that's just gonna get annoying after a while.
Totally. All right, moving on from safe hands. We'll stop. Yeah, the Dalinar's old wife. I did want to talk about that.
Yep.
Because that was one of my bigger questions coming out of Words of Radiance. Was I want to learn more about her and who she was and why Dalinar can't remember her and doesn't hear her name when it's spoken, all that kind of stuff. And we know it's related to the old magic and the Night Watcher and all this stuff. We learn a little more here, which is helpful. We learn one thing that I think we've kind of learned before, is that it seems like other people liked his wife. It seems like Navani liked her, and it seems like she was a generally well accepted person, which I don't know if that tells us a whole lot, but tells us a little bit. We learn in this chapter that he married her for political reasons. It sounds like, even more specifically, he somehow married her for shard plate. Like, her family had a set of shard plate perhaps, and he like inherited that because he married her. That seems to be the implication here, which is interesting. And there's almost like this dynamic of he married her for purely political reasons, but it sounds like he grew to really love her. And so that tells us a little bit. There's some hints to, I think it's in this chapter. Yeah, it is in this chapter, about a rather unfortunate death, is what it sounds like. It sounds like there's some hints to she was like taken captive and used as leverage against Dalinar. Yeah, I have a little bit of a theory here, if now's the right time, Trevor.
Go for it.
I'm a little scared here. So in Words of Radiance, we had some pretty dark flashback chapters. We really went to some dark places with Shalon's history. And we talked a lot about that in Words of Radiance and what Shalon has been through. I'm wondering if Dalinar has been through something equally harrowing, if he has been through or done something, terrible, similar to the way Shalon has done things that are terrible. But in Dalinar's case, he doesn't remember it. And more specifically, I think I want to chalk this up on the prediction board. I think Dalinar killed his own wife. I think somehow in that exchange, he either makes a decision that directly, like, he knows is going to result in her being killed, or somehow at his own hand, he actually kills her. And to stretch this even a little further, I think I've maybe kind of guessed this a little bit before. I think he then felt so terrible about that like broke him, that he went to the Night Watcher, and what he asked for from the Night Watcher was to forget her. I think that he hasn't been cursed with forgetting his wife. That's what he went and asked for, was, I can't live with this please remove this from my memory. And so the Night Watcher does, removes all memory of that. And so Dalinar thinks he's like trying to get back good memories of her, when in reality, I think later on we might find that he is eventually going to figure out what happened, and it's not going to be pretty. He might learn that what he had forgotten was something he probably wishes he had stayed forgotten. I that that's my oddly probably way too specific prediction for where I think this is going.
I'll ask your thoughts here in a second, Paul, but I just want to chime in here real quick that we have, I don't remember where it is, but we have a specific line. Oh, I remember actually where it is. It's where Dalinar is having visions in front of Renarin, and Renarin asks, "Hey, does this have anything to do with the Night Watcher? Because I know you've been there." And Dalinar says very, very briefly, very strictly, "No. I know what my boon is. I know what my curse is. It's not the Night Watcher for the visions."
Right.
So, if he doesn't remember his wife, would that mean he knows what that boon and curse is? And is that mutually exclusive? Is it not? That's my 2 cents there. Go ahead, Paul, if you have something.
I think Elliot. By the way, I think that was an incredible theory, and if not to that exactly, something very serious or very very similar is seriously a possibility, and I think that's really cool. And at least for story progression, that would be really really emotional. I was trying to think of a way how we can even top potentially Shallan's flashback chapters, because they're very emotion packed and very sorrowful. It helped my view of Shallan so much throughout the books, that I think trying to match that with Dalinar is definitely a challenge, but that's a great way to do it. My thoughts, I guess, with what Trevor was saying is, I see your point. I don't know if that fully rules it out, because he didn't say what they are, I guess.
Right.
But he could know that he has memories erased and that he unsure, but he could still know that he did that and that there was a reason, but doesn't remember why or what or things like that. But it doesn't necessarily cancel it out yet.
Right.
The other potentially compounding factor here is, if that was a known fact amongst our other characters that Dalinar killed his own wife, I think they'd react a little differently to the conversations that we've seen. Adolin and Renarin would obviously not react the way they do when they talk about their mother, or Navani would probably not talk lovingly about her. So if my theory is correct, I think it would have to be some version of Dalinar did this in a way that no one else knew what happened. Dalinar was the only one that knew that he had either by his own hand or indirectly killed his wife. So there's some hurdles for it, but I'm writing it down.
It still could be something along the lines of Kaladin and his brother
Tien.
I'm blanking on the name. Yes, Tien. Where it happens and the whole story is oh no, I'm going with you so that this doesn't happen, and it still happens, and it's just really sad and stuff. Almost kind of like the way he can't forgive himself for Gavilar's death. Yes. Even though he kind of does in Words of Radiance, at least a little bit of knowing, even if I was there and I was sober and fully ready, I couldn't have done anything. But that's probably not the case with his wife's death. We'll just see. But no, I like the train that you're thinking on there, with all of that.
So moving on a little bit from that, this doesn't really quite tie into what we were talking about there, but just an interesting note in this chapter. I actually wanted to read a quote because I thought it was really thought-provoking. Actually, it's more related to the marriage scene. I think it's right before the marriage, perhaps. I don't remember exactly. Dalinar's speaking to the Stormfather, and he's talking about oaths, and I think this has got to be after the marriage. and they're talking about oaths, and Downer says, I'm surprised that you agreed to perform the ceremony. And the Stormfather's like, well, yeah, I respect all oaths. And Downer responds with an interesting one. He's like, well, what about foolish oaths? What about, people that make, stupid promises or oaths they can't keep? And the Stormfather responds with this. He says, there are no foolish oaths. All are the mark of men and true spren over beasts and subspren, the mark of intelligence, free will, and choice. And I keyed in on that just because the name of the book is Oathbringer. So I'm looking for instances of, let's dive deeper into what do these oaths mean. And this seems like an interesting one there of the Stormfather as a spren puts a lot of weight on oaths, and he's pointing that out as this is what makes you different from a beast, is that you can make an oath, that you can make a promise and you can keep it. And that's an interesting thought if you think about it, because that is something that would mark you as like a higher intelligence, if you will. An animal doesn't make a promise specifically and then keep it, but a human can, and so that's important. The other thing I noted in that little word, in that little quote there, is we've got a new term there, subspren. What is that? He differentiates between men and beasts, and then he also compares that to true spren and subspren. So now we have like categories of spren. I'm not surprised by this. It seems like we're starting to discover there's different types of spren, but here we have very specifically two different categories of spren. Not sure how important this is for later, but I'm definitely going to mark it down.
Yeah. No, that I didn't catch that, and so I'm glad you brought it up. It does seem, at least in my mind, it seems kind of straightforward that it's like, especially with the comparison he's making, that there's spren like Sylphrena and Pattern and Wendell that we've seen that are like intelligent and make someone into a Knight's Radiant, and then there are the spren that are probably our sub spren, like Water spren or those that just kind of attract to things of nature and things of emotion and stuff like that. So that's what I'm getting at there. But yeah, that's something I didn't catch on to though, and it's interesting to think of there being kind of two categories there.
Just a kind of side note, in the next chapter, chapter 5, still talks about Gloomspren and how they're rare for some reason, and we've kind of had allusions to this in the past as well, where some people who are studying spren are trying to provoke a certain type of spren and they have to really work for it, and then some spren like wind spren are just everywhere, and fear spren and stuff like that. So
in that same section too, Syl talks about how her aunt, who apparently spren have aunts, who, and how her aunt hunts Gloomspren.
Yeah.
And that gets you thinking too, like, wait, are Gloomspren like more the beasts of the spren world? I would hope her aunt's not off hunting other people, equivalent spren. That is she a bounty hunter? Like, or is this more? I think she directly compares it to like a chasm fiend. The way you hunt chasm fiends. So yeah, maybe a Gloomspren is more of a subspren, like a beast is compared to a human sort of thing.
That's the novella we need. We need Syl's aunt bounty hunting other spren. Give me that novella, Brandon Sanderson.
Intense.
Just real quick, you mentioned the name of the book, Oathbringer. Up until this point, we have The Way of Kings, which was written by Noadon, and we have Words of Radiance, which was written by some unknown Ardent, speaking of the Knights Radiant. Chapter 1 of this book, what is our epigraph? Elliot, do you have it in front of you?
I do. Sort of.
I have it if you don't.
Yeah, go ahead. It'll take me a couple seconds to flip to it.
So our epigraph for chapter 1 is, I'm certain some will feel threatened by this record. Some few may feel liberated. Most will simply feel that it should not exist. From Oathbringer. Preface. So we have it confirmed in chapter 1 that Oathbringer is a book. And is the Shardblade named after the book? Is the book named after the Shardblade? Who wrote Oathbringer? Who knows?
Maybe it's a complete coincidence and they're not even related at all.
It's also possible.
I instantly thought of this, Trevor, though. I'm glad you brought it up. Because we've had this notion of like, okay, we know the Shardblade's called Oathbringer. And we've seen our books be named after some real world thing or in world thing.
Real world.
Yeah. I'm really immersed right
Yeah.
now. And so I saw those excerpts like from Oathbringer, and I was like, okay, so I'm assuming that this is an in-world book, and I assumed that our Shardblade is named after it. I feel like the other way around wouldn't make as much sense. I feel like Dalinar probably took some inspiration, or maybe where he got his Shardblade from. Got inspiration from it. Dalinar has showed great interest in the Way of Kings, but I'm sure he couldn't call his book or his sword the Way of Kings. So
that's true.
Yeah, but it was kind of cool to see that. Hopefully that I feel like that's not a major thing, but I am really curious, probably more so than our other books, of like how did this name come about?
Same. I'm hoping we'll get that maybe in the flashback chapters. Maybe those will build up to like the moment where he earns his Shardblade and names it, or who knows. That could be exciting. So I really want to get to Kaladin, but I do have 2 more quick things. They're not quick, actually. We're going to be here for a few more minutes on Dalinar here in this chapter. The first is to kind of end this chapter. Dalinar has a discussion with the Ardent that they have witnessed the marriage
Kadash.
ceremony. Yeah, Kadash, and they talk about how the Ardents frown upon this union. This is an act of heresy. How dare you do this? Blah blah blah. The more interesting half of that for me was the fact that Dalinar knows this guy. They have a history together. It sounds like all the way back to, a long time back to the Blackthorn days of Dalinar's life, and they seem to be talking around some sort of event, something that happened.
Yep.
And Kadash is specifically alluding to this, saying, I basically kind of boiling down to, I can't trust you, Dalinar, because I know what you're capable of, and really hinting at something again dark, something perhaps I don't even know what. I'm assuming we're going to find out eventually, but ominous that the two of them like don't even want to think about that day, whatever that day was.
Right. I'm glad you keyed into that. I was going to mention that if you didn't, because that's kind of how the chapter ends. Was Cash is like, I was with you on that day, so I don't know what you're talking about with your pious wedding here. So,
yep. So, some stuff to dread or look forward to, depending on how you look at it. I'm sure we'll hopefully figure that out. Whatever this is, this dark thing in Dalinar's past, find out in the future as we keep on reading. The last thing I want to talk about Dalinar is another big theory. I'm going to throw 2 big theories out here. This can be my theories I put out for the beginning of Oathbringer. Really, you ready? You ready for this one, guys?
I am.
Of course.
Okay, so I'm going to read a couple sections here. One from this book and one actually from Words of Radiance, because I've found 2 things that I think might be related. And the first one is in this book. It's actually not in these chapters. It's in chapter 1, in the vision that Dalinar has where he sees Odium, and he sees Odium's champion that we talked about last week. Odium is described as this bright light. Let me read it. A golden light, brilliant yet terrible, standing before it a dark figure in black shard plate. And that was the light and dark that I kind of talked about last time. But he specifically mentions that there's a heat coming off of this light, or a warmth. I'm trying to find it and now I'm not seeing it. There it is. It was brilliant and golden, but terrible, Dalinar whispered. It bathed everything in its heat. Let me take you back to the end of Words of Radiance. At the end of Words of Radiance, and we talked about this in one of our episodes towards the very end there, Dalinar has a vision when they're in Urithiru. And it's a very different vision than ones he's used to having. He usually sees like the end of the world or different points in the history of the Knights Radiant, things like that. Well, in this one, he sees his childhood, and he sees Gavilar and himself as children. And we talked about how this didn't seem like it was coming from the same place as his other visions. And let me read a little bit of that vision. So this is Dalinar in his childhood vision. He stepped to the balcony doors and pushed them open. Warm light bathed him, a deep, enveloping, piercing warmth, a warmth that soaked down deep through his skin into his very self. He stared at that light and was not blinded. The source was distant, but he knew it well. And I may be, again, focusing in on something a little too specific, but those two descriptions of blinding light and warmth and heat kind of described together seem similar to me. And so I wonder if that vision that we saw at the end of Words of Radiance came not from Honor, or the Almighty, who seems to be the source of his other visions, but instead came from Odium. And in this vision where Dalinar sees Odium and he is this light and this warmth, maybe that is imagery or feeling, senses that Dalinar gets when he's around Odium. I'll take it even further. I think that kind of running with that, let's say that perhaps now Odium is sending Dalinar visions as well. I think Odium may try to convert Dalinar. I think that let's say that vision of his childhood, which seemed like a really positive thing. It seemed like a very non-threatening, non-evil type of thing. I wonder if Odium is going to try and work against Honor in trying to influence Dalinar in his decisions. I wonder if we're going to get a little bit of this tug of war between Odium trying to pull Dalinar one way and Honor, or the Stormfather, trying to pull Dalinar in the other way. So that was a very long explanation for my new theory I'm running with of, I think that Odium is directly reaching out to Dalinar at this point and is going to try and seduce him, perhaps, for lack of a better term, try to convert him over to his side.
I don't know if this backs up your theory or not, but this is tangential to what you're saying. Later on in that chapter in Words of Radiance, Dalinar asked the Stormfather, it's like, yo, what was up with that vision this morning? I had never seen it before. And do you remember what the Stormfather says, Eliot?
Yeah, it's something along the lines of what vision? Or that wasn't me, or something directly along those lines.
Yep. He's like, I didn't send you a vision. There was no vision. There's no high storm this morning. Why would I give you a vision? So
exactly.
Messy.
Is this getting too confusing for you, Paul?
No, it's not. It makes sense. I was just saying that's definitely something I didn't think of, but sounds pretty. I guess I'll wait and see.
Again, I feel like I'm being way too specific and oddly, detailed with my predictions, but I think, I'm guessing, I'm predicting, I think that's where this story might go.
All right. Anything more for our two Dalinar chapters, which we've talked about for over 45 minutes.
Time for Kaladin.
All right, we have 3 Kaladin chapters here. The first 2 are kind of in fast forward mode. They're nothing too, groundbreaking here. Everything's kind of in chapter 7 of what we're going to be talking about here. But Syl and Kaladin are back. It's kind of their intro chapter, chapter 5. They have some banter back and forth as they're going to Hearthstone. And Kaladin's realizing the damage that the Everstorm has done as he's approaching Hearthstone. And when he gets there, he is told that the Parshmen did transform into their new forms, and then they left. So they didn't... He was fearing that Hearthstone would just be a war scene when he got there, of Alethi versus Voidbringers and everybody fighting each other. And the scene that he gets to, they are in dire straits, but that's because the only times they fought the Voidbringers was when they confronted them as they tried to leave, and that's when they fought them. But they didn't outright like start hunting them like he thought they might. So the Voidbringer, or the Parshmen, did transform into storm form, we're assuming, and then walked away. So what are your guys' thoughts on this before we get into Kaladin and his parents?
I'm intrigued. I'm along with Kaladin. I feel like I'm questioning their motives. Perhaps we've seen the destructive power they can wield in storm form, but it doesn't seem like they, at least initially, just wanted to rampage. So maybe they're like being called to, unite with the rest of their brethren, or there's a much bigger objective that they have that they immediately know they have to head towards. Yeah, I'm wondering what their motive is.
Yeah, I'm under the assumption that they have to be, like, there's no other reason for them to just leave, especially turning storm form. So my assumption is wherever this Everstorm is really, like, there's more than just it turns Parshendi into storm form Parshman. I said that wrong. It's more than just them turning into storm form. There's like a calling or something, a regrouping, and so I assume they're all going to unite forces and then attack all together. Is my guess. I assume that's just. It almost seemed understood, so I don't really see another way that could work out.
Okay. Kaladin walks into the manor, the Bright Lord's manor, and he punches Rashon in the face. Finally. And his words that he chooses at the end of chapter 6 are very, very interesting. His motive here is not what I would have thought as a first-time reader. When I read this, I was like, wait, really? That's why he punches him? He punches Rashon in the face, and he says, that was for my friend Moash. He is no longer seeking revenge on Rashon for Tien, who he originally harbored so much hate for. He's now fighting for Moash and his parents, who Rashon's as guilty for the death of Moash's parents. But Moash and Kaladin are not on good terms at the moment. And Kaladin, as he walks in here, he still calls him, this is for my friend Moash. So there's actually a lot of weight, like, for both Kaladin and Kaladin's relationship with Moash in that one line of where Kaladin's mind is right now, of, I still think that Moash is my friend and he's just misguided here. And he's let go of Tien's death fairly well at this point. Of I'm more worried about Moash and his family than I am about Tien and my family.
I completely agree. I was caught off guard by that too, and I had to stop and think about that. And I thought of the same thing you did, Trevor. He uses the word friend here. That was surprising to me. The fact that in Kaladin's head, Moash is still equal to friend. And so, yeah, the fact that Moash tried to kill him has apparently not been enough to move Moash over into not even like, acquaintance. He's still friend. Like I'm gonna punch you, Rashon, in the face because I'm standing up for my friend Moash. Like, whoa.
Yeah, I guess I didn't think very deep into this. It was really nice to see him punch Rashon. I will say it was one of those things that kind of felt overdue, and we were kind of just getting a little bit of justice there. But yeah, my guess why, or my understanding why, was I know Kaladin's whole deal when talking to Moash was like, hey, like, don't get back at these people. Let's get the people who like actually are responsible for bringing you and your family a lot of hurt. And so I feel like this was kind of just his moment to do that, which is straightforward. But even though he has had problems with Rashon, he knows he's not the only one, and so you know, yeah. It's also just kind of a little movie moment, right? A little
Yeah.
Oh,
toast from my
absolutely.
friend Moash,
Yeah. So then, after this little scene, Kaladin turns to his parents, and Elliot, you mentioned this earlier in the episode, and we'll talk about it here. That Kaladin's emotions here are very interesting. Where as he's talking to Lirin and his mother, he has a very distinct thought of they have no idea who I am. Like, I know who they are, or at least I think I do, and I not only am I a new person, I'm a new person. I'm a soldier. The soldier died. I'm a bridgeman. The bridgeman died. Now I'm a captain. The captain died, and now I'm a Knights Radiant. Like, he is so far removed from where he left at Hearthstone. And he's like, where do I begin with reuniting with my parents here? So, if you wanted to talk a little bit more about that, go ahead, Elliot. But
And it exactly what you described, and yet there's that touching moment where, despite all of that, Kaladin still has that moment where he just like holds the tools for his father while
yeah,
he's performing surgery. Like that moment where he just like for a few minutes returns to being a kid again, watching his father and learning with his father and just listening and being like with his family. Like, oh, that was touching. That was heartwarming. Just that moment of kind of innocence. Even though Kaladin has seen so much, he is so different of a person. He's been through so much. He can still, for a moment, just kind of go back and connect with his father over their shared passion for helping people. It was a powerful moment.
yeah,
Definitely. And that's exactly why, kind of circling around to one of my words, which was oxymoron. And it was this like, there was lots of just touching things, lots of kind of heartwarming things, but they were never presented in like oh, that's so sweet. Like, it was always Kaladin punching someone in the face, or um I don't know, all this stuff like that. And so it was interesting, but like, it was a gruff way of showing it, but like what's actually happening is kind of a nice, like, sentiment almost. Um
we get a couple more interactions here. Laurel is here. I don't know if you guys remember who Laurel is, but Laurel is Kaladin's childhood
crush, sweetheart.
girlfriend, crush. Yeah, like they grew up together. They were always, intended for each other, if you will. And then Rashon's moves to town. His son gets betrothed to Laurel pretty quick. His son dies, and Laurel ends up marrying Rashon himself. So there's some awkward vibes here, to say the least. And then Oradin is introduced. Kaladin has a little brother, not Tien, rest in peace. He has a second little brother, because I don't know, Liren and what's his mom's name?
Hasina,
thank you. They decided to, start another family since Kaladin and Tien weren't there anymore. So they like, yeah, we had another son. So Kaladin has a little brother coming out of this episode. There's a couple more things, but what were you guys' thoughts on Laurel being here and then Oradin?
Oradin, whenever he's introduced, like, it was definitely the reason that I wanted to put, like, New Comings or what did I say? New Beginnings. New Beginnings. Is mostly for that, because Kaladin is so upset with Tien dying, his younger brother, and this is a very different relationship, right? Like, this is a very young child,
Yeah.
that he won't grow up with like he did Tien, but definitely like a younger brother, he's gonna get to, I'm sure, take care of and protect and love, and so, it was very sentimental and sweet there.
Yeah, I agree. That was a touching moment, and another bit to just kind of give Kaladin another reason to want to protect these people. It's not only are they his hometown, not only is that his job as a windrunner to protect them, but his mother and father are there, and his brand new baby brother are there. So I imagine that's going to become another motivation for Kaladin, or another influence on him of now he has to consider his family in all of his decisions and equations.
So there's a chapter coming up pretty quick here, but I want to bring it up now anyway. There's a very interesting argument here where at the end of the chapter, Kaladin says, "Hey, come with me, and I'll bring you 3 to safety." Like as soon as he sees Oradin, he's like, "Okay, we're going to Urithiru. I'm flying you right now. I'm going to keep you safe." And Lirin makes a very specific argument as to why not. Did either of you remember this?
Well, his rationale is basically, if everything you say is true, if the desolation is coming, if war is upon us, these people are going to need me more than they ever have.
Right.
I'm the only one here who can save so many of them. I can't leave them in their moment of greatest need, basically.
Right. And this is going to, this is a minor spoiler, but this is going to brew in Kaladin's head of irresponsibility for Oradin from Lirin. That in from Kaladin's point of view, Kaladin thinks that it is Lirin's responsibility above all else to protect Oradin. And the fact that he wants to stay in Hearthstone to be that doctor in the field, like, you completely understand what Lirin's saying. Like, they don't need me in Urithiru. Why would I go to Urithiru? They need me here. But Kaladin views it as, you have a baby. I need to protect you 3 and keep you 3 safe because you're my family. So there's an interesting dynamic between the two of them of Kaladin's all about, keeping the people you love safe, and Lirin's, well, the way you do that is being here with them. If you can't keep them safe, you stay here and be what they need. So
We're we're going a little long, but I did want to mention one thing in this last chapter, chapter 7. Syl and Kaladin have an interesting conversation, and I got to say, Trevor, I think you may have opened with this, but I didn't realize how much I was missing Syl until Syl showed up again.
Yeah.
And it was like, oh yeah, Syl. I love Syl. Syl's awesome. It was cool to get some Syl moments back as we've coined them. But Kaladin and Syl talk about weapons. Syl Kaladin like is apologizing for swinging her into things, and she's like, well, you do it to us all the time. And he has like a moment of, no, I don't, I just use regular weapons. Oh wait, everything has a spren. I have been doing that. And I just thought that was funny. We joked before about everything having a spren, and Kaladin's having another moment of, oh, everything does have a spren. But then Syl's response to that even further actually is rather interesting, and maybe hints at some of the lore behind Spren a little bit. She goes on about the fact that Spren have genders, and she's like, oh well, you feel sorry for whacking a female into something, and Kaladin's like, yeah. She says, oh well, yeah, about half the weapons you've ever wielded were female. Right, logically, of course. But then she says this: it's your fault for personifying us, so no complaining. Of course, some of the old Spren have 4 genders instead of 2, because humans didn't imagine those ones. Silly. And it's kind of an offhanded little banter there, but I kind of pause. I'm like, ooh, wait a second. That's actually interesting. Some Spren have 4 genders instead of 2. And the reason why is because humans didn't imagine them. The implication there being that some other type of being did imagine them, perhaps those beings having had 4 genders. So that one sentence hints at so much.
Yeah.
First off, apparently there are perhaps beings that have 4 genders. Apparently there's Spren that have 4 genders. Those beings perhaps imagined Spren, and that's what created them. And perhaps the Spren that only have 2 genders were imagined by. Am I breaking your brain, Paul? I'm sorry. I stopped on this sentence
too late
while I
for
was
Paul.
reading.
No, it's not breaking. I'm just like, wow. Like, I remember hearing the 4 gender comment, and I was like, oh, cool. And that was it.
Yeah. But it could mean so much more. Like, is that how Spren coming to existence is the imagination of a human, or like, are they constantly being created that way, or is this like the origin of Spren was somehow at some pivotal point human imaginations created the realm of Spren, and all of a sudden everything had an imaginative version of itself, which was its Spren and Shadesmar. We've kind of postulated and guessed about that in the past, but this has some interesting implications to that discussion, all packed in that one little joke almost that Syl just kind of throws at Kaladin.
Yeah,
that was dense.
If you remember way back to our Ardens, I don't know why we keep referring to this specific interlude about our 2 Ardens talking about Flame Spren, but
yeah,
one of them goes in the other room, and the other Ardent writes down, okay, this Spren is 2.75 inches long or whatever, and so from that point on, that Ardent thinks of that Spren as 2.75 inches long, and so that's what it is. So the rules here are very strange for Spren of that's how you perceived it, so that's what it was.
Indeed. And I don't honestly know if I want to learn more about what it means to have 4 different genders, but who knows? Maybe that'll come into the story at some point.
Yeah, my biggest question is, you have a really good point of like someone would have had to have the concept of these 4 genders, right? for a little sprint theory here of like sprint are what you think them to be, like whatever you see them as or think them as or etc. is basically what they are. And so yeah, like, are we gonna learn more about that? Is that actually an important? So we with our main series books here, we could usually be like, oh, this little detail, let's write that down and we'll come back to it. But I'm honestly unsure if this is something. I mean, I'll definitely remember this. If anything comes up with like an old being that had 4 genders or something like that, that I will remember. But like, I don't know. It seems low on the priority list, but it is really
agree.
really
What-
neat.
That's low on your. What do you mean? That's low on your priority
Yeah,
list?
sorry. Yeah, high on the priority list is what?
Seth, always Seth.
Yeah, of course. I was trying to think of something funny, but I couldn't think of anything on the fly. High on
Ishik.
my priority list, all the like shard options, like shard forks and shard bowls, and stuff like that. Ishik, that's a name we haven't heard in a little while. Also, Axes now. Curious to see if he will play a larger part. Mr. Crumbling Man,
Mr. Kremlin Man.
of course.
Any closing thoughts on episode 57, chapters 3 through 7 here? There's a lot in here. There's some we didn't talk about, but I don't know if we have the time for it. We can touch on it later in future episodes.
Yeah, I think we hit all the major points. I agree that there was a lot packed in these chapters. I feel like we may be referencing back to some of these things we're seeing early on. So I'm sure we'll talk about it more later.
For sure. And I'm excited to see. We've really like put a ton of pins in these chapters, and things to look out for. And I'm really curious to see how it all plays out and how much of this becomes like fun things that we found early, or some of it may just never really go anywhere.
All right, the only way we can find out if it goes somewhere is to read more. So
It's for you to tell us. Let's go.
I guess that is one way. So one of the only ways that we can find out is to read more, which we'll go with that option. Sorry, Paul. We can read further and reconvene next week for episode 58. Thanks for joining me, Elliot and Paul.
Farewell.
You're welcome.